The sound of expensive china shattering against marble flooring echoed through the home's vaulted ceilings. Madison Winters stood frozen, her hand still extended from where the teacup had been moments before. Across from her, her husband of 11 years, Ethan, stared back with the hollow expression of a man who'd run out of lies. "Say it again," Madison whispered, her voice unnervingly calm despite the storm raging behind her eyes. "I want to hear you say her name out loud." Ethan's jaw clenched. He looked down at the broken porcelain scattered across their pristine kitchen floor, a fitting metaphor for what remained of their marriage. "Madison. It's complicated. Her name." Each word came out like a shard of ice. A heartbeat passed between them. Then another. "Olivia," he finally said. "Olivia Blackwood." Madison felt something inside her shift, something fundamental breaking loose. Olivia Blackwood, the woman who had hosted them for dinner just last weekend. The woman whose husband, James, had become friends with Ethan through their law firm. The woman who had hugged Madison goodbye with the same arms that had been wrapped around her husband. Without another word, Madison turned and walked toward the front door. "Where are you going?" Ethan called out, panic finally breaching his carefully constructed composure. Madison paused with her hand on the doorknob and looked back over her shoulder. Her face had transformed, grief giving way to something colder, more focused, to see James. 3 months earlier. "I think you'll like them," Ethan said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror as Madison applied the finishing touches to her makeup. "James is one of the best corporate attorneys I've ever worked with. Brilliant mind. And Olivia. Well, she's charming. You two might have a lot in common," Madison smiled, capping her lipstick. At 41, she still turned heads, though lately she'd been wondering if her husband still noticed. Their marriage had entered that comfortable middle phase, secure but predictable. No children by mutual choice. Their careers had taken precedence, Ethan as a partner at Wheeler and Schumann Law, and Madison as chief curator at the city's Contemporary Art Museum. "What does she do?" Madison asked, reaching for her earrings. "Interior design. Has her own firm. Very successful from what I hear." They were headed to an upscale restaurant downtown to meet the Blackwoods for the first time, a couple Ethan insisted could become close friends. Madison had been hearing about James Blackwood for weeks now, how he'd transferred from the New York office and was making waves at the firm. The dinner was Ethan's idea. He'd been pushing for more socializing lately, something Madison found curious given his historically introverted nature. The restaurant was exactly what Madison expected. Expensive without being gaudy, filled with the ambient noise of clinking glasses and muted conversation. She spotted them immediately, a striking couple seated at a corner table. James Blackwood stood as they approached, hand extended. He was tall with broad shoulders and salt and pepper hair that looked deliberately styled to emphasize the silver at his temples. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "Ethan, good to see you outside those conference room walls," he said, voice carrying the faintest hint of a Boston accent. "And you must be Madison." "Ethan speaks very highly of you," Madison smiled politely. "All good things, I hope." "Nothing but praise," James assured her, gesturing to the woman beside him who was now standing. "This is my wife, Olivia." Olivia Blackwood was not what Madison expected. Where James was all business, Olivia had an effortless bohemian elegance about her. Honey blonde hair falling in loose waves, a silk blouse in a bold emerald green, and eyes that crinkled when she smiled. She was younger than James by at least a decade, probably in her mid-30s. "I'm so glad to finally meet you," Olivia said, embracing Madison briefly. "I've been feeling like the new kid at school since we moved here 3 months ago. It's nice to meet another professional woman who isn't one of James's colleagues' wives asking me when we're having children." Madison laughed, warming to her immediately. "Well, you're safe with me. Ethan and I decided long ago that our careers were babies enough." The evening flowed easily after that. The Blackwoods were charming, James with his dry wit and Olivia with her infectious laugh. By the time dessert arrived, they were all leaning in, conversation jumping from art to politics to travel. Madison found herself genuinely enjoying Olivia's company, recognizing a kindred spirit in her independence and ambition. "We should have you both over to our place next," James suggested as they waited for the check. "Olivia's been dying to show off what she's done with the house." "I'd love to see it," Madison said sincerely. "Maybe we could look at our calendars now?" As they pulled out phones to compare schedules, Madison noticed something. A brief glance between Ethan and Olivia as James and Madison were distracted. Just a moment, quickly extinguished, but it registered somewhere in Madison's subconscious. A look that lasted a beat too long. On the drive home, Ethan seemed energized in a way she hadn't seen in months. "What did you think?" he asked. "I liked them," Madison replied honestly. "Olivia's interesting. Different from the usual firm wives." "James is incredibly sharp," Ethan said, eyes fixed on the road. "The kind of connection that could really advance my career. And if you and Olivia hit it off, all the better." Madison nodded, staring out the passenger window at the passing city lights. Something about the evening had left a small, inexplicable knot in her stomach. But she pushed it aside. This was good for them. New friends, new energy. Over the following weeks, the couple saw each other frequently. Dinners at trendy restaurants, an art exhibition Madison had curated, a weekend sailing on James's boat. The four of them clicked in that rare way that adult friendships sometimes do, comfortable and stimulating at once. Madison found herself looking forward to Olivia's texts and their occasional lunches when their schedules aligned. If Madison noticed Ethan checking his phone more often, she attributed it to work. If he seemed distracted at times, she blamed the stress of a major case he was handling. If he suddenly cared more about his appearance, buying new clothes, starting a new workout routine, she told herself she should be grateful for a husband who still made an effort after 11 years of marriage. The first concrete suspicion came 6 weeks after meeting the Blackwoods. Madison was using Ethan's laptop to order concert tickets while hers was updating. A notification popped up, a text message from Olivia appearing on his synced phone account. "Same time tomorrow?" "I can't stop thinking about yesterday." Madison stared at the message until it disappeared. Her heart rate picked up, but her mind immediately began constructing rational explanations. They were working on something together, perhaps? Maybe Olivia was consulting on office design for the firm, or they'd run into each other at the gym. She didn't mention it to Ethan. Instead, she began paying closer attention. The way he positioned himself near Olivia at gatherings, how he'd volunteer to help her carry drinks from the bar, the inside jokes that had developed between them. Each observation could be innocent in isolation, yet together they formed a pattern that became increasingly difficult to ignore. Then came the late meetings. The weekend work emergencies. The business trip to Chicago that coincided with Olivia telling James she was visiting her sister in the same city. Still, Madison needed proof. Suspicion wasn't enough to confront the man she'd built a life with, the man she still loved despite the growing distance between them. She needed certainty before she'd risk destroying everything. One evening, Ethan left his phone on the kitchen counter while showering, something he never did anymore. Madison stood staring at it. The moral dilemma of invading his privacy weighed against her need to know the truth. Before she could decide, the screen lit up with a notification. "Miss you already. Jay thinks I'm at yoga. Can you meet earlier tomorrow?" Madison felt the floor shift beneath her. She picked up the phone, her finger hovering over the home button, knowing Ethan's password was his birth year. One swipe and she'd have access to everything, every message, every lie. But instead, she set the phone down exactly as she'd found it. She didn't need to see more. The sickness in her stomach told her everything. That night, she lay beside her husband in bed, a chasm of unsaid words between them. As Ethan's breathing deepened into sleep, Madison stared at the ceiling, tears sliding silently into her hair. She thought of James, intelligent, kind James who had welcomed them into his home, who spoke of Olivia with such obvious pride and affection. Madison made her decision before dawn broke. She wouldn't confront Ethan with suspicions. She would get concrete, irrefutable evidence. Not just for herself, but for James too. He deserved to know. Over the next 2 weeks, Madison became someone she barely recognized. A woman who noted the mileage on her husband's car each morning and evening, who checked credit card statements for unexplained charges, who invented meetings to leave work early and follow Ethan when he claimed to be working late. The evidence accumulated quickly once she started looking. Hotel charges disguised as client meetings, lengthy phone calls when Madison was out of the house, text messages deleted but visible in the cellular bill's detailed log, dozens to Olivia's number daily. The final confirmation came on a Tuesday afternoon. Madison had installed a tracking app on Ethan's phone after borrowing it while he slept, something she never imagined herself capable of doing. The app showed his location at a boutique hotel downtown, the same location where his credit card had just been charged for room service. Lunch for 2. Madison drove to the hotel in a state of eerie calm. She parked across the street and waited. At 2:47 p.m., they emerged together. Ethan held the door, his hand lingering on the small of Olivia's back. They kissed briefly before separating, Olivia walking toward her white Range Rover, Ethan heading back inside, presumably to work remotely for the rest of the afternoon, as he'd told Madison he was doing. Madison took photos with her phone, her hands surprisingly steady. Then she followed Olivia's car, not to confront her, but to confirm she was heading home. Madison needed to know where both players would be for what came next. That evening, Madison prepared dinner as usual. She opened a bottle of wine, set the table, and waited for Ethan to return from his late meeting. When he walked through the door at 7:30, she greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, fighting the revulsion that threatened to overtake her. They ate dinner, discussing mundane topics, a new exhibit coming to the museum, office politics at his firm, whether they should plan a summer vacation. Madison marveled at his performance, at how easily the lies fell from his lips. Had he always been this person, or had she simply failed to see it? After dinner, as Ethan loaded the dishwasher, a task he'd suddenly started doing in recent months, part of his campaign to ease his conscience, Madison casually mentioned the Blackwoods. "I was thinking of inviting James and Olivia over this weekend. It's been a while since we've had them here." Ethan froze for a microsecond before continuing to rinse a plate. "This weekend might be tough. I might have to go into the office." "Sunday, then," Madison pressed. "For brunch. I know James mentioned wanting to try my creme brulee French toast." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Sunday could work, I guess." "Perfect," Madison said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I'll text Olivia tonight." Later, in the privacy of her car during her lunch break the next day, Madison made the call. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she dialed James Blackwood's direct line at his firm. James Blackwood speaking. "James, it's Madison Winters." "Madison, hello. What a nice surprise. Olivia mentioned you're having us over this weekend." Madison closed her eyes briefly. So Olivia had already coordinated with Ethan, making sure their stories aligned. "Actually, James, I was hoping we could meet. Just the two of us. There's something I need to discuss with you." "In person?" A pause on the line. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "No," Madison said simply. "It's not. But I think you should hear it from me directly. Are you free for coffee tomorrow morning?" They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe far from both their offices. After hanging up, Madison sat in her car, her resolve hardening. Sunday's brunch would never happen. By then, everything would be different. The next morning, Madison arrived at the cafe 20 minutes early, securing a corner table with privacy. She'd barely slept, rehearsing what she would say, how she would present the evidence contained in the manila folder she now placed on the table before her. James arrived precisely on time, his usual confident stride betraying no concern, until he sat down across from her and studied her face. "You look like you haven't slept," he said gently. "What's going on, Madison?" Madison took a deep breath. The moment stretched between them, the last moment before she would irrevocably alter the course of multiple lives. She had considered every alternative, every possible approach. In the end, she had decided James deserved the unvarnished truth, just as she would have wanted. "Ethan and Olivia are having an affair," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "It's been going on for at least 6 weeks, possibly since shortly after we met you both." James didn't move. His expression remained completely neutral, as if she'd commented on the weather. Only a slight whitening of his knuckles around his coffee cup betrayed any reaction. "That's a serious accusation," he finally said, his attorney's training evident in his measured response. "What makes you think this?" Madison slid the folder across the table. "Everything's in here. Credit card statements, phone records, photos, hotel receipts. I've been gathering evidence for 2 weeks." James didn't open the folder. He stared at it, then at Madison, searching her face. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because if it were reversed, I'd want to know. And because I've made a decision about how I want to handle it. But I think you deserve the right to make your own choice." James nodded slowly, finally reaching for the folder. "And what have you decided?" "I'm leaving Ethan," Madison said, the words sending a shock through her system despite having rehearsed them countless times. "But not before they know that we know. Not before they face what they've done." James opened the folder and began methodically reviewing its contents, his expression growing harder with each page he turned. Madison watched him process the evidence. Dates, times, locations, all meticulously documented. The lawyer in him couldn't deny the thoroughness of her case. When he finally looked up, James Blackwood was a different man. The polished professional veneer had cracked, revealing something raw and dangerous beneath. He closed the folder carefully, almost tenderly before speaking. "I appreciate you coming to me directly," he said, his voice pitched low. "Many wouldn't have." "What are you going to do?" Madison asked. A cold smile touched James's lips. "I think we should give them exactly what they deserve. Together." Sunday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of autumn sunshine. Madison moved through her kitchen with practiced precision, preparing a brunch that would never be eaten. Ethan had offered to help, but she'd shooed him away, telling him to relax before their guests arrived. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "On our way." "Is everything ready?" Madison replied with a simple, "Yes." Their plan had come together over several intense conversations. James, initially shattered by the evidence, had processed his grief and emerged with a focused anger that matched Madison's own. They'd spent hours strategizing, discarding several approaches before settling on one that felt right to them both. "They should be here in about 20 minutes, Madison called to Ethan, who was arranging flowers on the dining table, another new habit in his repertoire of guilt-assuaging behaviors. "Great," he replied, sounding genuinely enthusiastic. "I picked up that champagne Olivia likes for the mimosas." Madison nodded, ignoring the stab of pain his consideration for Olivia evoked. "Perfect." At precisely 11 a.m., the doorbell rang. Ethan moved to answer it, but Madison touched his arm. "I'll get it. Finish setting up the mimosa station." She opened the door to find James standing alone on their front step, impeccably dressed in a casual blazer and jeans. "James," Madison said warmly, embracing him. "Where's Olivia?" James stepped inside, his eyes immediately finding Ethan in the background. "She's running a bit late. Said she'd meet us here." The two men exchanged greetings, and Madison led them to the living room where she'd set out coffee and pastries as appetizers. "Olivia texted that she's about 10 minutes away," James said, checking his phone. "Something about stopping for flowers." Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it surreptitiously, then excused himself. "Just need to check something for work. Back in a second." Once Ethan was out of earshot, Madison and James exchanged a look. Everything was proceeding as expected. "How are you holding up?" James asked softly. "Surprisingly calm," Madison replied. "Almost like I'm watching someone else's life." "It's shock," James said knowingly. "The real feelings will hit later." They fell silent as Ethan returned, looking slightly agitated. "Everything okay at the office?" Madison asked innocently. "Yeah, just a client being difficult," Ethan replied, forcing a smile. "Nothing new there." The three made small talk for several minutes. discussing an upcoming charity gala, a new restaurant downtown, the unseasonably pleasant weather. To an outside observer, it would have appeared to be a normal gathering of friends. Only the occasional glance between Madison and James hinted at the tension humming beneath the surface. At 11:23 a.m., the doorbell rang again. "That'll be Olivia," James said, his voice betraying nothing. "I'll get it," Ethan offered quickly, standing before Madison could respond. Madison and James remained seated, listening to the front door open, followed by a moment of silence. Then Olivia's voice unnaturally high. "Oh, I thought James is already here?" "Yes, he's in the living room with Madison," Ethan replied, his voice strained. They entered together, Olivia carrying a bouquet of lilies and wearing an expression of barely concealed panic. Her eyes darted between her husband and Madison before settling on the coffee table between them. "Sorry I'm late," she said, her usual confidence noticeably absent. "The florist took forever." "No problem at all," Madison said, rising to accept the flowers. "These are beautiful. I'll put them in water." "I'll help," James offered, following Madison to the kitchen. Left alone, Ethan and Olivia stood awkwardly, maintaining a careful distance from each other. From the kitchen, Madison could see them through the serving hatch, Ethan making a small gesture with his hand that Olivia shook her head at sharply. "They're terrified," James observed quietly as Madison arranged the lilies in a crystal vase. "Good," she replied, her voice steady. "They should be." When they returned to the living room, Madison placed the vase prominently on the coffee table. "Shall we move to the dining room?" "Everything's ready." The four took their seats at the dining table, Madison and James on one side, Ethan and Olivia on the other. Madison poured mimosas while Ethan distributed plates of her signature French toast. The domestic normalcy of the scene was surreal, given what was about to unfold. "Before we eat," James said, raising his glass, "I'd like to propose a toast." The other three lifted their glasses, Ethan and Olivia exchanging a quick, nervous glance. "To honesty," James said, his eyes moving between his wife and Ethan. "And to consequences." A heavy silence fell over the table. Ethan shifted in his chair while Olivia took a large sip of her mimosa. "Speaking of honesty," Madison said, setting down her untouched glass, "Ethan and I have been married for 11 years. That's a long time to build a life together. To build trust?" Ethan's face paled. "Madison," she held up a hand, silencing him. "Please don't interrupt. I've earned the right to speak uninterrupted, don't you think?" Ethan fell silent, his eyes fixed on the table. "James and I have become quite close over the past few days," Madison continued. "We've had a lot to talk about." "What is this?" Olivia asked, her voice thin and brittle. "What's going on?" James smiled coldly at his wife. "I think you know exactly what's going on, Olivia. Just as Ethan does." Madison reached beneath the table and produced the manila folder, placing it between the untouched plates of food. "Inside this folder is everything we know," she said calmly. "Hotel receipts, text messages, photos, financial records, times, dates, locations. There's really no point in denying anything." The color drained from both Ethan and Olivia's faces. Ethan reached for the folder, but James placed his hand firmly on top of it. "That's our copy," James said. "We have others. How long have you known?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. "Long enough," Madison replied. "Long enough to consider every possible response. Long enough to decide exactly how this ends." Olivia began to cry silently, mascara tracking down her cheeks. "James, I can explain—" "Can you?" James cut in, his voice like ice. "Can you explain lying to my face for weeks? Can you explain cheating on me with my colleague? With our friend's husband?" He turned to Ethan. "And you. I welcomed you into my home. I trusted you professionally and personally." "It just happened," Ethan said weakly. "We never meant it just happened," Madison repeated incredulously. "Affairs don't just happen, Ethan. They're made up of hundreds of deliberate choices. Hundreds of moments when you could have stopped but didn't. What do you want from us?" Olivia asked, wiping at her tears. "Why are you doing this?" Performance? Why not just confront us privately? Madison and James exchanged a look before Madison answered. Because you took something from us in secret. You stole our trust, our dignity, our futures, all while smiling to our faces. We wanted you to feel what that's like. To sit here, breaking bread with people you've betrayed, wondering what's coming next. Are you filing for divorce? Ethan asked Madison directly, finally meeting her eyes. Yes, Madison said simply. The papers are being drawn up. You'll be served next week. And you? Olivia asked James, her voice small. James took a slow sip of his mimosa before answering. My attorney will contact you tomorrow, but I think you should know that I've already spoken with the managing partners at the firm. Ethan, your position is precarious to say the least. Dating a colleague's spouse violates several ethics clauses in your contract. Ethan's face contorted with shock. You can't do that. That's my career. You should have thought of that before sleeping with my wife, James replied evenly. Actions have consequences. That's the lesson here today. So that's it? Olivia asked, looking between Madison and James. You humiliate us and ruin our lives? That's your perfect revenge? No, Madison said, standing slowly. The revenge is what happens next. She walked to the side table and picked up an envelope, which she placed in front of Ethan and Olivia. What's this? Ethan asked, not reaching for it. Open it, Madison instructed Olivia. Took the envelope with trembling fingers and removed 2 key cards. I don't understand, she said. Those are key cards to room 7018 at the Grand Plaza Hotel, Madison explained. The same room you two used on at least 4 occasions, according to the hotel records James acquired. It's paid for through tonight. You're sending us to a hotel? Ethan asked, confusion evident in his voice. We're giving you what you want, James clarified. Each other. Because here's what's going to happen now. You two are going to leave here together. You're going to go to that hotel room and decide what your lives look like after today. Because as of this moment, neither of you has a marriage to return to. But my things, Olivia began. Your personal items have been packed, James informed her. They're in the trunk of my car. I'll have them delivered to the hotel. And your access to our apartment has been revoked, Madison told Ethan. The locks were changed yesterday. Your essentials are also packed and will be delivered later today. The stunned silence that followed was broken only by Olivia's renewed sobs. You planned all of this, Ethan said, realization dawning on his face. Yes, Madison confirmed. Just as you planned your deception. The difference is, our plan ends today. We're giving you the clean break you were too cowardly to ask for. Get out, James said quietly but firmly. Go to the hotel. Figure out if what you've destroyed everything for is actually worth having. Ethan and Olivia sat frozen, the magnitude of what was happening finally sinking in. Now, Madison added, her patience exhausted, leave our home. Slowly, like sleepwalkers, Ethan and Olivia stood. They collected their phones and the key cards, not looking at each other. Without another word, they walked toward the front door, Madison and James following several paces behind. At the threshold, Ethan turned back. Madison, Don't, Madison interrupted. There's nothing you can say that matters anymore? The door closed behind them, with a quiet click that somehow sounded deafening in the sudden stillness of the house. Madison and James stood side by side in the foyer, both breathing heavily despite having barely moved. The confrontation had drained them in ways neither had anticipated. Are you okay? James asked after a long moment. Madison considered the question. No, she answered honestly, but I will be. 6 months later. The gallery hummed with the particular energy of an opening night, champagne flutes clinking, the murmur of appreciative conversation, the occasional burst of laughter. Madison moved through the space with practiced ease, fielding questions about the exhibition she had curated, fractures and repairs, art in the aftermath. It was her most personal show to date, featuring works that explored themes of betrayal, resilience, and reconstruction. Critics were already calling it her finest achievement, a breakthrough that transformed personal pain into universal reflection. "Excuse me, Ms. Winters?" Madison turned to find a young reporter from the local arts magazine, notepad in hand. "I was hoping to ask about the thematic through line of the exhibition. There seems to be an emotional journey from devastation to, not exactly healing, but a kind of powerful reconstruction." Madison smiled. "That's very perceptive. I think reconstruction is the right word. These artists are all examining what happens after something shatters, whether it's a relationship, an identity, or a belief system. How do we gather those pieces? Which ones do we keep and which do we leave behind?" As the reporter scribbled notes, Madison's gaze drifted across the room to where James Blackwood stood admiring a sculpture, a jagged glass form that caught the light in unexpected ways, creating patterns of shadow and illumination on the surrounding walls. "One last question," the reporter said. "Several critics have suggested this exhibition feels deeply personal. Would you say that's accurate?" Madison considered her answer carefully. "All meaningful art stems from authentic experience. I'll say that this past year taught me that destruction can be a form of creation. Sometimes things must break apart before they can become something new and honest." The reporter thanked her and moved on. Madison made her way toward James, who smiled as she approached. "This piece is extraordinary," he said, gesturing to the glass sculpture. "Like frozen lightning." "I thought you'd appreciate it," Madison replied. "How was Boston?" "Productive. The New York merger is finally moving forward." He glanced at his watch. "Sorry I couldn't make it earlier. I wanted to be here for the whole opening." "You're here now," Madison said simply. In the months following the confrontation with their spouses, Madison and James had developed an unexpected friendship. Not romance. Both were too wounded, too wary for that. But something equally valuable. A genuine understanding that could only come from shared experience. They had become each other's touchstones during the painful process of dismantling their marriages. Madison's divorce had finalized 3 months ago. James's had concluded just last week. "Have you heard anything?" James asked as they moved to a quieter corner of the gallery. Madison knew what he was asking. "Ethan accepted the position in Seattle. He leaves next month. Together?" "No." Apparently, once the thrill of secrecy was gone, so was much of the attraction. "Olivia moved to Chicago in February, from what I heard." James nodded, absorbing this information. "Are you glad that they're not together?" Madison considered the question. "I thought I would be, but honestly, I don't feel much of anything about it anymore. Their story isn't mine." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the crowd circulate through the gallery. Madison had expected to feel vindicated when she heard Ethan and Olivia had separated just weeks after being exposed. Instead, she felt something closer to closure, the final page of a chapter that no longer defined her narrative. The review in the Tribune called this exhibition a masterpiece of emotional archaeology, James commented. Madison laughed softly. "Art critics do love their metaphors." "It fits, though," James insisted. "You took something painful and excavated it layer by layer until you found something valuable beneath the hurt." "Maybe that's the perfect revenge," Madison mused. "Not destroying the people who hurt you, but creating something they never could." "Something true." The gallery assistant approached, informing Madison that a prominent collector wanted to discuss acquiring one of the centerpiece paintings. "Duty calls," she said to James. "Will you stay a bit longer? A group of us are getting dinner after." "I'd like that," James replied. As Madison walked away, she felt a sense of alignment that had been missing for so long. The exhibition around her represented not just a professional triumph, but a personal one as well. Evidence that she had not merely survived betrayal, but had transformed it into something meaningful. In the aftermath of destruction, she had found her most authentic voice. Not despite the broken pieces, but because of them. Each fragment had become part of a new mosaic, more honest and resilient than what had been shattered. Outside the gallery windows, the city lights reflected in endless patterns across the darkened glass, broken into countless points of illumination, yet somehow forming a perfect whole.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.